Okay, what I want to talk about is morality. And I think everybody has an idea of probably what it means. As we go through this, actually what I started doing, I just started writing. I'm a nerd, I'm geeky in this way. I don't think I'm a geek in real life, but in Catholic stuff and the things of Catholicism, I am a little bit geeky. So I study this stuff all the time. So I just started writing, and as I was writing, I thought, well, maybe I better go and find the documentation about where all this stuff comes from. Actually, Carol and I were talking earlier. We went to the same church as children. I didn't know her because she's so much older than I am, but it was easier to be a Protestant for some of these very reasons. The Reformation, some of the things that it did and some of the things that happened during the Reformation, it just seems like, from my perspective, that, quite frankly, the reconciliation, when you have to go to someone to ask for forgiveness, is a little bit harder than doing something during the day and then at night just saying sorry and everything is all right. Now, I'm not saying Protestants are not holy people, they are. As a matter of fact, some of the holiest people I know are Protestant. All my children are Protestant. Some of them not so holy, some of them a little more holy. So, but it did seem a little bit easier. The morality is essentially the same, but actually two of the issues we're going to discuss tonight, they're not the same. And one of them is a little bit the same, but a little bit not the same. I do want to do one thing. When you asked last week, and sometimes for those of us who have to come up here and stand, when a question gets asked, and this is off the subject, but I wanted to address it because I just thought about it. When a question gets asked, sometimes it doesn't register. You ask about a mark of Satan. I think, didn't you ask last week? And David answered that yes, there might be a mark on us from Satan. Well, I think he misunderstood in the sense that the Catholic Church understands that there's an indelible mark when we are baptized and confirmed, or when we get holy orders. There's not anything like that. Satan has no ability to somehow mark us. We are marked through a concupiscence, through the flaw that happens through original sin. But there is no physical mark in the sense that the Catholic Church understands. I don't know if anybody can remember that, but I want to get that out there. I want you to look real quick here. This is what we're going to kind of be. This is kind of the basic foundation of why the church believes some of the things we're going to talk about tonight. Unitive, procreative. This is the husband and wife together in a conjugal act. This would be what transpires from that. This is children. What happens out here, the church views in a negative way. And what happens here, the church also views in a negative way. We'll talk about that when we get to artificial contraception and in vitro fertilization. But we'll start with, what is morality? What is it? Does anybody have something?
Conscience of doing something right?
Exactly. It's the choice between right and wrong. It is that free will choice that we make to choose good or to choose bad. It refers to the goodness of any act. All acts, well, I guess there probably are some fairly amoral acts, but really in most situations there is a good and a bad, and morality is how we choose that. The morality of a human act depends on the nature of the act, the intention that you have when you do it, and whatever the outcome, the end, so to speak, is. So it's the object, it's the intention, and it's the circumstances. There are some non-negotiable things. St. Thomas Aquinas addressed them. What would you think would be a non-negotiable? Now, I'm not talking about a specific issue, like abortion or that, but what would you think would be a non-negotiable in morality?
Murder?
No, not a specific issue. It is never okay to do something evil so that a good will come from it. You can never do that.
Personal gain, yeah.
Or what would be
The end doesn't justify the means.
The end never justified. That is non-negotiable. The church says you cannot do that. What would be an example of that? Can you think of one?
What did she say? The end?
The end never justifies the means.
Okay.
I can think of one. Killing a doctor who performs abortion
Absolutely.
to stop him from performing abortions. That would never be correct.
Right.
What about killing somebody like
the church makes no exceptions. There's no exception where the end would justify the means.
But the Lord will forgive you.
Of course, and we're going to actually talk about forgiveness.
The Lord will forgive you for murder. So that's kind of a two-ended sword too.
Right. Also, good intentions can never justify an evil act. Well, my intentions were good, so therefore I did this. The intentions never justify the act. And then a morally good act requires the goodness. It requires whatever you're doing to be good, is what it boils down to. It has to be a good thing. It cannot be an evil. Peter Kreeft is a guy, for people that have been Catholic a while, he's a well-known Catholic philosopher. He's a professor at Boston College. He says in society today, it's not that we don't know what is morally right, or that we are somehow morally weaker than in past times, is that we have lost the sense of what is morally right. We just don't. We've made it so subjective, situational ethics, subjective morality, that type of thing, that now we don't have a sense anymore of what that is. It's become subjective. It's that I feel versus I believe. I feel like this is okay, instead of I believe that is not okay. And I feel, and then it's a collective that somehow society, we're going to talk about abortion, but somehow is the law of the land, so therefore it must be moral. If some, there's a school of thought that says if something is legal, then it must be moral. And we know that that's not true, because if that were true, then slavery would have been morally okay, but it wasn't. So the consensus does not determine right or wrong. That was one thing that the church, when they were when democracy really started flourishing, Pope Leo XIII was, I think, the first, Terry, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was the first. They had some reservations about democracy because they thought it would become a mobocracy. They did not want the people to be able to vote. It might actually have been before Pope Leo XIII, but right in that time, in the 1800s, they were nervous about it. Now they've come full circle. They now recognize democracy as the best form of government for all of us to reach our highest calling. But at that time, the church was a little bit afraid of that. I want to give you this quote. This is John Henry Cardinal Newman. He's a convert. He was an Anglican bishop who set out to prove the Catholic Church wrong, and then he converted to Catholicism. Very, very bright man. And he talks about when we have this sense of right and wrong, S-E-N-S-C. It is, the sense of right and wrong is so delicate, so fitful, so easily puzzled, obscured, perverted, so subtle in its argumentative methods, so impressionable by education, so biased by pride and passion, so unsteady in its course, that in the struggle for existence among the various exercises and triumphs of the human intellect, the sense is at once the highest of all teachers, yet the least luminous. In other words, we can't rely on our senses. And that goes to what we have to rely on is reason that is informed by faith. Reason, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more here in just a second. All right, so with that in mind, what morality is, and if you have any questions, stop me. I've had a cold for the last few days. Okay, all that the church does and teaches is for the benefit of mankind. It's for us. The church doesn't do anything, it doesn't have rules that are going to try to make us miserable. That's not the purpose of the church. It is for our greatest joy that we, to make us bring about the ultimate joy, not happiness, which is fleeting, but joy of meeting Him face to face. Our time on earth is fleeting, but our time with God or without Him, and this is what I tell my teens that I teach every Sunday night, eternity is a long time. Make right decisions here, this side of death, because you don't get another chance. So you have to make the decisions this side of death. Eternity is a long time. Here on earth, we are tempted by Satan. We're tested by God. God's testing leads to virtue and holiness. Satan's temptations lead to vice and perhaps eternal separation from God. So when we have desires that the Catholic Church puts forth as detrimental to our walk with God or separates us from Him, we are called to resist with our best efforts. good news is this. The church gives us a lot of tools to resist. Gives us a lot of tools to combat the desires that all of us have. Those desires of the flesh, those things that cause us to sin. It gives us the Eucharist. It gives us baptism. Catholics believe that in baptism we are infused with the theological virtues of faith, hope, and charity. Confirmation, which some of y'all will get, the ones that, well, I guess all of them will get. Confirmation, which is, the church looks at as kind of like armor. It's for the battle. It's that the way the New Testament talks about that. And then reconciliation, which perhaps is the best of all, because reconciliation allows us to start anew, and this goes to what you were saying, start anew and re-enter the covenant, which allows us to participate once again in the source and summit. The source and summit is the Eucharist. That is the Catholic faith. The source and summit of our faith is the Eucharist. But reconciliation allows us to re-enter that covenant when we've fallen out of it through temptations, desires that have separated us from God. Sin. When we have sinned and we have fallen away from God. This gives us sanctifying grace, which is a small glimpse of heaven, a small piece of the beatific vision. Beatific vision is heaven. And sanctifying grace is the kind of way they describe it, is it's just a small piece of that. It's just a little piece. The Eucharist, the real presence in the Eucharist is a powerful, very powerful thing. You can't do that if you're outside the covenant. And we didn't get to finish when we did the Jesus thing, but the way the Catholic Church looks at justification, when you're outside the covenant, you can't participate in the Eucharist. So reconciliation allows us to come back into the covenant and re-enter the Eucharist. We're all going to stumble. Some of us are going to fall. Some of us are going to stay down. But we all have the ability to get back up and be restored. We only have to act on the desire to be reunited to Christ and His church. We are forgiven. Makes no difference what it is. Whatever the most heinous crime you've committed, the only one you can't be forgiven for is which one? Well, yes, but what does that mean?
Rejection of God.
The power of God.
Yeah.
That, it really,
Turning
but
back on God.
in a very simplistic way, it's the one you don't ask forgiveness for.
Disbelief.
Your sin is so great that God can't forgive it, and you say, I'm not going to ask. That doesn't exist. That sin doesn't exist. Ask, and you will be forgiven. Great thing about the church. Hard to do. That's why I said it's easy in my former days when I did things a little worse than I do today. It was easy at night to like I said, do whatever I wanted to do and then go home and ask forgiveness.
Well, what if you keep going back and doing the same thing?
That's problematic, and we're not going to talk about that tonight, but over the course of, because what happens then is you have to resolve, when in confession you are resolving to try not to do that anymore. But there are some things such as addictions and there are some various things that can play into it where your culpability is certainly lessened. And we'll talk, if you'll remind us, we'll talk about that as we go forward. And that goes to how you define a mortal sin. But for our purposes here, you ask, you're forgiven. Now, at some point, if you go back to the same priest every single week, and you've done exactly the same thing, he might say, and Terry, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, he might say, we need to talk about this. You're murdering one guy a week, and I'd like you to stop. This is not a good thing. Quite frankly, I've heard priests say somebody's living with their girlfriend, and the priest finally, after 6 or 8 weeks, says, you probably need to move out. You're asking forgiveness for the same thing. Maybe you're not doing what you should be doing, and they can withhold forgiveness until you meet certain whatever criteria they might set up. They have the right through Matthew chapter 16 to do that. So whatever sins you bind will be bound. Whatever sins you loose will be loosed. Okay, so how do we form our conscience? I forgot to do this, but if you want to write these down, this is 1777 through 1778 in the Catechism. Basically, our conscience has to be formed through education. We're taught how we form our conscience. Now, we can form it somewhat through reason, but reason only, and it came to mind when I was writing this today, I thought about Ayn Rand, and I'm not an expert on Ayn Rand, and I know she's a famous atheist, but she did have actually she had a fairly good understanding of virtue, and she said you could get there through reason only. But the church teaches you can't get there completely through reason because your mind is flawed due to original sin. It's obscured. So reason can get you to a certain point. That's what the Greeks did. Reason got them as far as they could go, but then they needed God to get to that. So they needed divine will. They needed revelation, divine revelation, to take that next step. So reason can get you, but reason informed by faith is what we're talking about. So our conscience is formed by reason, but it is in conformity with the wisdom of God, assisted by the gifts of the Spirit, aided by the witness or advice of others, and guided by the authority of the church. A well-formed conscience makes a right judgment that always seeks what is right and good and discerns the will of God as it is expressed in the divine law, as God has written, like she was saying. And actually, this is a pretty good start. It's a good ending point too, but it's a good starting. The Ten Commandments, when you go to confession, is a good place to start. Just check your life off through the commandments, just as it goes down through here. And you can usually find something. Maybe the first one, if you can't find anything wrong that you're doing, maybe you're not putting God first in your life all the time. So you probably can ask forgiveness for the first commandment. This isn't always easy. In some situations, it is difficult to discern what the good is. I'm not talking about situational ethics, though, but sometimes it's in your conscience, as you're trying to discern the good, it may be a difficult thing to do. But there is usually a right and wrong, almost all issues. And we may have trouble discerning this due to an immaturity in our faith, fear of reprisal, pride, guilt, selfishness, ignorance. Keep in mind, ignorance can't be willful. You have to, you can't just be lazy. You can't be complacent. You have an obligation to learn your faith and what is and is not what we're doing. We must, as I said, seriously seek the right and good and not be complacent or willfully ignorant. All right, now we're going to talk about some issues facing the church. I'm going to start with one of the easier ones, maybe. It's a terrible issue, but it may be one that we actually, we probably can come to some kind of consensus on, and it's abortion. Although it's a difficult choice, it might, like I said, it might be the easiest because most Christians and even some non-believers actually can find some common ground on this. Usually the argument is, when does life begin? Even if with non-believers or with maybe some Christian denominations that maybe are not quite as Catholic as we are, we would, where life begins might be the discussion, but most believers, most people of faith oppose abortion. Some will say that the Bible doesn't condemn abortion because abortion's not mentioned in the Bible, and it's not. They're right. But there are other things in the Bible that are not, or that we believe that are not in the Bible. However, where it is mentioned is a place called the Didache, D-I-D-A-C-H-E. This was a document. It's the letter, the teachings of the apostles. This was written maybe as early as 60 A.D., which is only 30 years after Christ, perhaps as late as 100, 110, something like that, but very, very early on. And I'll just read what it says. You shall not commit murder. You got that. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not commit fornication. You shall not steal. You shall not practice magic. You shall not practice witchcraft. You shall not murder a child, you shall not murder a child by abortion, nor kill that which is born. Not only abortion, but partial birth abortion, it condemns it. This almost made it into the scriptures. We do a study. One of the things we do is we tell you how the canon was formed. The Didache it was one of the ones that was seriously considered.
How far back do we have record that kind of procedure has been done?
The Romans were doing it. It's one of the reasons that Rome fell. The Egyptians were doing it. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians were doing it. Their population was dwindling when Moses was there. That's one of the reasons why they theorized that the Jews were increasing in population, the Egyptians were going down because they were aborting so many of their children.
And for what reason?
Population control.
Same reason
we do it today.
Convenience in a lot of cases.
Not enough food, famine.
Honor
Yeah.
the family.
Yeah, vanity, because women didn't want to get fat. And same thing
But I thought that was like, that was considered to be beautiful back then.
There's no reason to believe that it would be for any different reason than we have today. But perhaps what Wynn is saying might actually be, the
Probably
Egyptians
more.
would go through famine and feasts for over
That's
the
right,
course
'cause
of.
it says that in the Bible.
Right, so they perhaps were doing that. So anyway, the Didache, very early document, tells us that. One thing the Catholic Church doesn't have is what some people will call the Protestant exception: rape, incest, life of the mother. The Church does not support abortion, period. It does not condone abortion in any case, for any reason. Difficult teaching.
Can I just want to share real quickly something. My cousin, who lives in California, he and his wife, they had tried for a long time, they're Protestant, but they had tried to have a child, and she got pregnant, she'd had several miscarriages, and she was in her 36th week, and her water broke, and she went to Catholic hospital, and they kept her in the hospital because they wouldn't they're not gonna induce, so they kept her in the hospital, and they said, well, the water may remake itself, and she may be able to carry the baby full term, so she was there. And finally, they realized that the baby was not gonna thrive when it was, born, but they still had to wait for her to go into labor. And because of that, she got to hold her baby before it died. And so my aunt, who has no grandchildren, this is her only grandchild, she wears a thing around her neck, and it's for Annie, because they got to hold she was living, but she died almost immediately, but they were able to have, and now she can't have babies, so this is the only thing that she had, and it was because she was in a Catholic hospital. So,
What the Church says is we don't remedy a violent act with another violent act. I know somebody who, I'll tell you a real quick story. We're gonna run out. Somebody I know knows a child that was born conceived out of rape, and she said that it was a precious, precious child that had been put up for adoption, and the child was flourishing. But so you see that if you can't carry the child, if you can't keep the child yourself, there's always adoption. I mean, adoption is what I mean to say. But when you see a child that has been conceived that way, and then you see how precious they are, then you realize that a violent act, abortion, would have remedied that other violent act, which I think, I would submit, I'm not a woman, but I would submit that would cause a great deal of pain for the mother. It would be the violent act that had been perpetrated against her, and then, quite frankly, the abortion that she would have had later. So I'm not making a value judgment, I'm just telling you, I think it would be a difficult thing. All right, artificial contraception. This is where some people, Catholic Church does not support it. Sometimes it comes as a surprise for people. Prior to 1930, all churches opposed artificial contraception. All churches, regardless, all Christian churches. Prior to 1930, and then in 1930 in the Lambeth Council in the Anglican Church, a council they have about every 5 years, I think, 5 or 10. They have it periodically. They they eased the restrictions on artificial contraception for certain cases. Very shortly thereafter, they eased all restrictions very shortly thereafter. Most Protestant churches, I don't know of any that don't allow artificial contraception. And let me say this. When I came into the church 7 years ago, my wife had a hysterectomy 35 years ago. It is very easy for me to sit here and tell you that artificial contraception is wrong. I don't have to deal with it. So this is not a battle that I struggle with. I sympathize with people that have to do that, because when I was in my 20s and 30s, it probably would have been a very difficult issue for me to deal with. But it goes back to, do we trust the church, and do we trust God? And do we, in obedience, understand that the reason that the church does this is for our greater good, and that because of that, we grow in holiness, we grow in virtue.
And because, well, I want you to keep going. I know we're getting short, but we'll still have time. But when he's talking about these things, and first of all, I want to say that there's forgiveness for everything. If we come across a topic here and you say, oh, I've already done that in my past, there's always forgiveness. So there's never any condemnation in this room. But the church has these symbols like this for
Actually, I was gonna get to that.
Oh, you
but-
were gonna get to it, okay.
Well,
all
I
right.
can do it right now. Go ahead, while
No,
you're there,
that's
you
fine.
just do it. No, just do it.
I'll
right
just
there.
point.
No, you do it. What the church says in artificial contraception is, you have the unity,
See,
you
it
have
says
the.
acts of sexual intercourse or
Right,
marital,
and-
have to be one, both of these, they
Right.
have to be unitive and procreative. You can see that artificial birth control, your act would be unitive, but it would not be procreative. Therefore, we can say that the church would take a stand against that, but you'll have some good arguments or whatever for, like, humana vitae and stuff like that, right?
Right. Yes, I do, I have humanity that coming up.
Okay, I don't wanna
So
rush.
keep that in mind, because actually in vitro fertilization and those types of things are the opposite of that.
They are procreative?
They're procreative but not unitive. They take the conjugal act out of it. They take the love between a man and a woman out of the equation, and now you only have the procreative, but you actually do have the unitive. And the church says that middle ground is where we operate. It's that center.
And the church has said, when this is practiced, women become victimized. And you can
Excellent.
see that, and in this, men become victimized because they are no longer necessary. So, okay.
And a lot of people don't know this, many artificial contraceptives are abortificants, so they are actually causing an abortion. Not all, but many of them are. So, and so that, and a lot of people don't know that they actually cause an abortion. In 1968, Pope Paul VI, right on the heels of the Second Vatican Council, which changed it, it shouldn't have, it was a very volatile time, was that, Marcy, for the church. It seemed like everything was, a lot of things were happening, and Pope Paul VI saw some things that were going on. And in response, partly maybe in response to a 1965 court case before the Supreme Court in what they call Griswold versus the state of Connecticut, in which the court ruled that artificial contraception was a right to privacy. Now, this set the table for the 1973 Roe versus Wade. I'm going to read you in a second how the court ruled on that, and what the court said in 1992 in Planned Parenthood versus the United States, with in a case, I think the last case brought before the court on abortion since that. But Pope Paul VI was very prophetic, and here's what he said was going to happen if we continue artificial contraception. And he makes a direct link between artificial contraception and abortion, and I'll give you that link. He said infidelity would increase. Can you think of why that would be?
Yeah, no consequences.
No
yeah.
consequences. You can have sex. You can have sex with your neighbor's wife with no fear of pregnancy. So the consequences leave. And I'm not saying that that's what people did, but that would be maybe an unintended consequence, but a consequence anyway. You can now stop the procreative part of it, and now sex becomes the only reason for what you're doing. Lowering of moral standards. He said that moral standards would be lower. Does anybody doubt that today moral standards are lower than they were maybe 40 years ago? Less in respect for women. Women become nothing more than a sexual object, quite frankly. And I think you can see with the rise of pornography and the things in this world that women have been objectified. And basically what it comes to, women are just, their whole purpose in many cases because of that, they become just mere satisfaction of male desires. And one of the things I like to say is that men are pigs. I can say that. I say that with all affinity and all love for men. I am one. But men need to be domesticated, and the way they're domesticated is marriage. And when you take all this stuff away and you make it so easy to do this, then men become, well, quite frankly, I think they become predators again. Not in a, you know what I mean. It gives undue power to the state. Look at China. China says we're going to abort or contracept. We only want one child per family. So the state gets too much power. It can determine population control. It can determine the sex. You know, if you don't. He said that there would be undue power given to the state. Catholic Church promotes NFP. Once again, that with all, I have to say, I've not had to do that. We have a girl come in last year, Valerie, who came in, and it's 99 point, it's as good as any pill. The only thing that's better than NFP is, what would you think?
Abstinence.
Well, I was gonna say, the only birth control that is abortion.
Right.
Abortion guarantees the child dies. You have at least a small chance of NFP.
Elliot, tell them what NFP is.
Natural family planning. And don't ask me how to explain it, because I don't know.
No, my girlfriend actually.
I wanna hear
gave
this.
me-
I don't know.
She gave me this like
Ask Victoria.
$75 book.
I wanna hear your version.
No, you-
Yeah.
It's not the rhythm method.
No.
Is it a fertility method?
Yes. And actually, Monique.
Yeah, she
um,
took your temperature and.
Actually, Monique teaches it, I think. I think.
Right. So if anyone
Yes.
needs, I have the book.
Well, it's something that maybe if you're a childbearing year, Zach, you
I
shortly will
had
be.
to get to the course with my fiance.
Okay. I will say this, that Humani Vitae that was written in 1968, many Catholic scholars, theologians, and lay people thought the Pope was getting ready to lift the restrictions on artificial contraception, on divorce, and remarrying. It was a shock. And that document has been a very hotly contested document since he put it out. I do want to read this. This is not directly from it. This is a synopsis of it. It says, of that document, Humani Vitae, the link between contraception and abortion is evident in the controlling legal reasoning on these matters. In the 65 case, Griswold versus Connecticut, I told you it gave women the right to privacy, and it found that right to privacy in their right to artificial contraception to prevent pregnancy. The supposed right was then extended to Roe versus Wade in '73, and that's where they got the foundation for it. In the 1992 Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and this was a Democratic governor of the state of Pennsylvania, Bob Casey, who was pro-life. Imagine that. It upheld the legality of abortion in the United States. The Supreme Court expressly ruled, and this is frightening, expressly ruled that abortion had to be kept legal in order to provide the remedy in the case that contraception fails. 1992, this happened. So if contraception fails, they have to have recourse to an abortion. We're not making judgments on people who've had abortions. If you have, God forgives all sins, all of them. We can't stress that enough. But we have to say that, the church teaches that abortion is wrong. Okay, in vitro fertilization, I'm gonna run. What do you want to do?
Go.
In vitro fertilization, this is the opposite of artificial contraception. Now, you can have the procreative, but you don't have to have the unity. The Sex Act is completely.
But what about people who can't get?
I know.
Anyway, I have like a friend,
I understand.
a cousin who, that was the only way they were able to have children.
I understand, and that we're not condemning that at all. And let me just say that.
So what's happening? Are they breaking a sin? Or are they making a sin? Or are they breaking a law? Like, what is that called when someone does something like that?
It is,
without
the
this?
church looks at it as simple, yes.
But it
But
does
let me
not
get-
look at the children as.
No, it doesn't look at
No.
children as anything. Let me give you what the church says, and then
Okay.
and this is the way I put it. I wrote this before, and then I went back and verified it. But this is a very difficult teaching, and compassion is necessary when talking about it. People cannot have children, and these methods offer hope for them. The church is aware of this and feels for their suffering, but it goes to the scriptures in Genesis, where Sarah is crying out for a child, and she's not getting one. And then it goes when Rachel is crying out for a child with Isaac, and it did happen supernaturally. So it's not something that the church is not sympathetic to or not sensitive to. And the church actually is compelling science to try to find ways to reduce infertility. It says science should be something that is a good thing if they would be trying to reduce infertility. In the end, we can only pray for people who are in this situation and hope they will at least come to understand that the church is teaching and why it is in their best interest. And it goes to obedience. It goes to, can you trust God? Can you trust the church? And then there's always adoption. And as I understand it, adoption there's plenty of children.
I have a cousin who adopted
And they got pregnant.
and got pregnant through
Right.
IVF.
Yeah. That's very common, yeah.
Right.
But she did get pregnant through IVF and she had twins, and now she has 3 boys.
Yeah. Nobody here, especially me, is going to. My job is never to condemn or judge. My job is only to tell you what the church teaches. It's a terrible situation. It's a difficult teaching. But it does dissociate the sexual act from the procreative act. husband and wife do not give of themselves to one another. And then, quite frankly, technology ends up having dominion over the marital relationship. You're turning your marital relationship over to technology. And then, of course, there's the added thing about, and somebody that may know more, when the way, I don't know that much about how you do in vitro fertilization but a lot of, the church opposes all those eggs being
Frozen.
out there frozen that end up being destroyed. So this is that correct, Marshall?
Embryos actually
Right.
fertilize eggs, right?
Fertilize eggs, right.
You know, for one baby, they might fertilize
50 eggs or whatever,
and
right.
where
And
does
you know,
life begin?
The church doesn't, I always tell people, he's not looking at you and saying,
No.
Marla, you can't do in vitro, or you shouldn't have a baby. What they're saying is, we condemn this because it's going to lead to, which you can see it has. So the church speaks globally about these issues, and it's unfortunate, but, you know, the proper thing is just to pray that God will expand your family the way that He sees fit. That's what the Catholic Church teaches.
The way it would probably be presented is it's an opportunity to grow in virtue, the virtue of obedience, the virtue of understanding and trusting that what God says. And, you know, quite frankly, we all have to make a decision whether we trust God or we don't. I mean, it may not be in this area for me, it might be over here in this area, but we all, in whatever area we're talking about, we may have to do that. This was another thing from Humani Victim, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to do that. Capital punishment, we're going to run through this fairly quick. Some people believe, and there you'll hear Catholics say that the Catholic Church that capital punishment is forbidden in the Catholic Church. That is not correct. Our present Pope and Pope John Paul II both were against it personally, but the Catechism still says the capital punishment, and I'll explain the way it is. In the spirit of consistent ethic of life, you'll hear people say, how can you be pro-life on abortion and pro-death on capital punishment? Great question. I think the question is misguided. We're talking innocent versus guilty. But I will tell you, in my own life, I got tired of hearing it. I got tired of it being thrown up in my face. So I said, fine, I'm no longer pro-death penalty. If that is the only reason that you're not pro-life, is because I'm pro-death penalty, I can change my position. So now you asked me, it was hard, but in an act of obedience to myself, I said, okay, no more death penalty. Difficult for me because I'd always been pro-death penalty. I did not see the contradiction. I'm saying I think it's a straw argument. It's a straw man argument.
You just said to us that, like, one violent act doesn't result for another violent act. Wouldn't that be the case then?
No, because in capital punishment, the state has decided that a person is guilty of a violent crime, and the church says that the state has the right to protect society from that person. And that the only way they can do it, and that goes to where I was going to head with that, if the only way they can protect society from Charles Manson is to put him to death, then that's when the church says that the state has the right to do that.
That's such a gray area for verbiage, because you can say the same thing, well, if a woman's been raped, here's the gray area of verbiage that I'm gonna put there.
No, it's
And
not.
no,
It's not.
No.
because the person being put to death is someone who's committed an
Yeah,
act
but it's still
against
a
someone.
violent death, putting them. to
No, what the
death is still
church
another
says is
violent
that
death.
in modern society, there is no reason for a death penalty if you can confine the person like life without parole or whatever.
Right.
That is what it says. If you're somewhere, in like Africa where they can't contain
Right.
people, then that could be an option. We had talked about if people continue to murder, if they get life in prison without parole, what can you do? Add another life without parole? You can't do anything. If they continue to murder while they're in prison, that might be acceptable. But basically, the church is against it, and every major death penalty case that has come up, the Pope has written a letter saying, don't put this person to death. So basically, we do have a stand against it, but it's not as
It's not
total
it's not
as abortion,
it's not,
where it's
right.
always.
Right. So what it boils down to is in the case of an abortion, an innocent person is being killed. In the case of capital punishment, an innocent person is not being killed. A guilty person is being
But
killed.
only in the
But-
gravest matters.
And that's
to
what it says.
state.
At the very least, the church said it should be rare or even non-existent. Once it is carried out, and this is kind of the main reason behind it. Once you kill that person, they're no longer redeemable. And ultimately, the church is responsible for souls. So the church wants their soul to be saved, and if you kill them, you don't give them a chance at redemption.
Except for the person, whoever's actually doing the act in an uncomfortable position because of the Ten Commandments, because if
So-
they're injecting
Well,
them with
it's murder as
injection.
opposed to killing. There's not murder in the case of that because the state has the right, it has been given, it is a right that the state has to do this. Suffice it to say that the church does not, it would like it to be either completely not doing it or so rare that it would be something that would startle people if we were doing it. Carla Faye, is it Carla Faye?
Carla Faye Tucker.
Carla Faye Tucker in Texas a few years back. She was redeemed. She was not a threat to society anymore. They put her to death anyway. But then you go, it's one of those issues where you just have to wrestle with it yourself. You have to come to your own conclusions about it. I can't think Maria Goretti, a little girl she is a saint now, but she was brutally raped and murdered by a man. Her mother ended up forgiving the man, and that man, after spending time in prison, was redeemed and was at her canonization in the 1950s maybe, or 40s, right in that. So there is redemption for people, and the church, that's what the church is in the business of doing, is saving souls. So any way we can get that done, we need to do that. In the West, we really don't need to do it anymore, although you could make a case that if somebody murders somebody, you put them out on parole after 20 years and they go out and murder somebody again, the state has not done its job. It has not incarcerated that person. Okay, last but not least, homosexuality and gay marriage. 2357 and 2358 in the Catechism. Full disclosure, we have a lesbian daughter, my wife and I do. My new daughter-in-law, her dad and her dad's sister are both homosexual, and I have a dear first cousin who is also lesbian, very militant about it. So this is not a theoretical issue for me. I'll tell you what the church teaches, and it's something that is difficult. A lot of people suffer from this. Why does the church oppose gay marriage?
Does it fulfill both of these? And it's, by nature, it cannot.
The church sees marriage in Scripture as between one man and one woman. A man was to leave his father and his mother and join his wife and become one flesh. Jesus reiterated this in Matthew chapter 19. God has always intended that. One man, one woman. That's from the beginning of time. That has been his intention. One man, one woman. He told them to be fruitful and multiply. Can't do it with this thing right here. The procreating unitivity it cannot happen. And even if you say, well, you can still have a child in other ways, any way you look at it, you eliminate one of those two by doing this. And the church faces it's a foundational issue. This is a foundational issue. This way of looking at it is. And I'm just going to read this to you. I wrote this down. The church is sensitive to those who have same-sex attraction, as it states in the Catechism. For them, this constitutes a trial, and they must be accepted with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. That's a quote out of the Catechism. Catechism goes on to assert that any unjust discrimination should be avoided. Then that's the end of the quote. This is me. Christians who have this attraction are called to unite with Christ's sacrifice any difficulties they may have. Just as priests and religious are called to chastity, so is the homosexual. This is a very difficult teaching of the church in the 21st century, but it is the consistent teaching of the church since its inception, and it's the consistent teaching of the Scriptures from Genesis on. In our day, when the issue of gay marriage and homosexuality is in the forefront, both politically and spiritually, we must as Christians walk that fine line between the truth of the Scriptures and the church and compassion for our fellow man and the struggles they face. If we constantly remind ourselves that the purpose of the church on earth is to help each of us grow in virtue and thus holiness, and not to judge or condemn our fellow man, then we will be living the gospel. The church, on the other hand, deals with issues that affects man's holiness, and in her wisdom, she has determined that the active homosexual lifestyle is detrimental to our growing in virtue and holiness. Nobody here condemns anyone for this same-sex attraction. but we have to tell what the church teaches. I think that's consistent with what the church teaches. Any questions? Comments?
So what's morality? No.
Just a quick question, it's probably best addressed further down the line. But you talked about the beginning of life, the end of life for the convict. The Catholic Church, I think is important to realize, has a real social conscience that in between those two bookends, we have a moral obligation to support that child who we pled for their birth.
Absolutely.
And this is a hang-up, particularly in our country, that we forget that after the child's born, you gotta feed him, you gotta clothe him, you gotta take care of him, you gotta educate him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, so that they don't become the convict that you're killing at the end of their life.
Let me, matter of fact, you'll just bear with me for 1 second. Let me read you what I think is appropriate to what you just said. James chapter 2. When I was a Protestant, I could find this all the time. Now I struggle to find it. Let's see. Well, I don't see it, but it's where it says, where you tell someone that is in need and you say, go in peace, God bless you, and you don't try to help them. Be doers of the word and not just hearers only. To go to what Wynn is saying, we have to, if we're gonna require people to have babies, both out of, and we have an epidemic obviously in this country, child wedlock. I had the statistics here. Then we have to be able to, we need to have a place, and I had a priest tell me just this week that I would be surprised at how many young girls come to him and say this, and he has nowhere to send them. And so we have to be ready, both in our time and our talents, our money, to support these children, so as you said, they will not go on the street and become criminals.
Elliot, you kind of said this, but I think, as Catholics too, aren't we, if we have friends or loved ones who are gay or had IVF or whatever, any of those things that are maybe part of their lives, and they're otherwise good people and all of that kind of stuff, I mean, it's not our job to, judge them or try to change them, I think. I mean.
Well, the only thing I would certainly not judge them, and I'm not saying try to change them, but if you were asked, when I'm asked, what does the Catholic Church believe about this? I don't hesitate to say, this is what the church teaches. This is what the church believes. This is what I believe, because I accept the teachings of the Catholic Church. So, and like I said, it's not a theoretical issue for us, and our daughter knows where we stand on this issue, and there's no question. But that doesn't mean that, yeah, she comes to the house. I mean, what I'm saying is, but the issue, it's a difficult issue, and it's actually hard for me to articulate. This is something that I've tried to articulate for a long time. But to me, it goes to, ultimately, you want people to be joyful. And I don't think that this lifestyle, particularly the homosexual lifestyle, I've seen the hurt that it brings to others and to the person. Some fleeting happiness, but not joy. I haven't seen it. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying that my experience with it has been that it is a lifestyle that is fraught with pain.
And our church has to teach this, because the church has to tell us what's right or wrong, or else we wouldn't know. I mean, it has to tell us what is sin, what isn't. But that takes the pressure off us. We don't have to tell. I mean, like you said, if people ask us what the position is, but we're not in a position of judging people, whatever circumstance they are in. The church in love has to tell us, because if they don't, we might continue in a simple behavior, not knowing that it was wrong. So it's their place to tell. I don't know if you want to use the word judge, but it's never our place to judge people. We can judge actions maybe, but never judge people. Anybody that comes to us, we need to accept with just open arms like Jesus would.